If you're watching this video, likely you manage one of these European retail funds called UCITS, and it's also likely that at some point when wanting to offer this UCITS into a new European market, you have heard of this requirement of making local facilities available to investors. In this video, I wanted to talk about how regulation in Europe catches up with the digitalization in the consumption of financial services and how this makes the offer of local facilities easier and more cost efficient. As a bonus, we'll tell you also what to do if you're ready to transition to a new digital facilities agent. First of all, a little refresher on the principles or some of the principles that underpin the European Union. We're talking about freedom of movement that is applicable to jobs, people, services, goods, capital, and when we zoom in onto investment funds like UCITS funds, freedom of movement means that you can set up a fund in Luxembourg or in Ireland, for argument's sake, and sell it in Germany or in Austria. So there isn't really a need for you to set up a fund in the jurisdiction where you want to target investors, because these are goods of financial nature that can move freely across Europe. There is a little catch. For these foreign European funds, when these are offered into an host domicile, which is called, or a target domicile, which is not the jurisdiction where they're established, the UCITS directive imposes that you have to offer local facilities to investors. What are these local facilities? In the old world, it was mainly a brick and mortar presence, mostly offered by a bank or any other credit institution, where an investor could go seek information about the fund they've invested in, and also carry out some of the activities like subscribing for more shares or units, redeem, make a conversion. The provision of local facilities was one of the debated provision under the Capital Markets Union. And that's because there was no uniform interpretation across Europe. And in some countries, the local regulation wanted that you appointed a credit institution to perform the service. In some others, there was no clear indication, and it's like the local facilities could also be offered from the place where the fund was essentially established. In reality, there were two issues with the local facilities in the way they were traditionally offered until the Capital Markets Union. On the one hand, the cost that came associated with the facilities was very high. In fact, if you had to appoint a credit institution, the cost would go very quickly up to the 10,000s of euros per year, and multiplied by the number of countries where you offer your funds, and realistically you have a big barrier to entry or to the freedom of movement of these funds. On the other hand, also the way financial services are consumed did evolve over time since the inception of the UCITS, and so it is very rare, with the exception of certain southern European countries, that an investor would go to a bank to ask to redeem the shares of its fund or to ask for information about an annual meeting. And that's because there is a more intimate relationship with their distributor, which takes place through digital channels. And so nowadays the investor would go directly to their distributor, maybe online, to deal with the aspect that relates to the redemption, the conversion, the additional subscription. They wouldn't go to a facilities agent. And so the idea was to change the way the facilities were provided by clarifying, in first instance, that there is no requirement to have a physical presence. A physical presence might in certain cases be necessary for commercial reasons, but it's not required by regulation. The facilities can be offered also electronically and also by the UCITS itself, not necessarily by a third party. and the only requirement is that these are provided in the language of the country or the market in Europe where the funds are offered. And so this opens to a different way to offer the local facilities, which makes it easier both from an operational perspective and from a cost perspective as well. From an operational perspective, which is also the way we have developed our solution, you have a website where all the fund documents are uploaded and made available in various languages, the NAV prices, and there is a support offered electronically via email in the language of the various investors. And so you move from a situation where you have to manage different counterparts, so the different facilities agents, the different credit institutions appointed across Europe, to having to manage one counterparty only, one cost center only, one only channel of communication for documents and NAV prices, making operationally much easier to grow your distribution. There is of course also an element of cost efficiency, because for being able to digitalize the provision of facilities, transforming them into a website and not having to hire different entities, you are also able to achieve significant economies, especially if you have a distribution that is of course pan-European in outlook and covers more than one market in the Union. It is very important on this point to look in perspective and consider that there is also the retail investment strategy coming out very soon, and if you want to know more about it, we linked an article in the description of this video, which will introduce also the value for money assessment. And so if you want to be on the right side of the assessment of the value for money, you better consider to transition to a new way of offering facilities. Last point on the facilities are not only the point of contact for local investors, but also for local authorities. So you want to make sure that when appointing your global and digital facilities agent for Europe, you make sure that the people you entrust this task to are of course conversant in dealing with regulatory authorities. Considering that basically you have made the decision now to, or you were already pondering to make a transition, what are the areas that are impacted in your fund operation? What is that you really need to look at? First of all, governance. You will have to seek the approval of your board and most likely also describe the reason why you want to make this change. The second area is legal. You will have to terminate existing agreements with existing providers, enter into new agreements, and also update your fund documentation, and likely also inform your investor, if you want, that there is a new facility, if you like, where they can go and get information about the fund. Operational is another area that needs to be looked at when transitioning to a new facilities agent, digital and global, because you will have to establish the feed of documentation that is required to be publicly displayed for the fund, as well the feed for the NAV. Lastly, one of the other area, the last one if you like, that gets impacted, because you will have to inform also regulatory authorities of this change. And this is a change that most likely will be considered a change in marketing arrangements, and so we'll have to be notified with a month in advance. Before we go, one point which I wanted to make is related to the fact that the new provision on the facilities are of course interesting, because they open two things in particular. The first one UCITS management companies or UCITS promoters could offer the facilities themselves. And then secondly, the various tasks under the facilities can be allocated to different entities. Basically, we haven't seen many fund houses wanting to be their own facilities agent, and that is for various reasons, mostly surrounding the fact that they don't want to be seen as dealing with client money, and they don't want to be seen as dealing with retail investors at all, right? And so they decide to outsource it. But because you can divide the various tasks under the facilities, and you can decide that one entity carries out a specific task and another entity carries out a different set of tasks, it is also possible to push all the tasks that are related to dealing with client money to a distributor or to an administrator, which is what is happening in the industry, and retain for yourself or outsource the role of dealing with the queries of the investors that pertain to the documentation, to making a complaint, for instance, to make available the NAV prices. One point is important: you will always have to deal with retail investors, and you will have to deal with them in their own language, even if you are not dealing with their requests to subscribe and redeem, because having only a website doesn't fulfill the role of the facilities, because you have to offer this support in an electronic fashion as well, which means via email, and you will have to be the point of contact for the authorities. There is more to come on European regulation. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned.